Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, positive, while my husband's phone buzzed with another text from Jessica, saying she missed him already. Elena Morrison sat on the cold bathroom tile, her world splitting into before and after with the mathematical precision of 2 pink lines. 6 years of marriage, 3 years of trying for a baby, and now this moment arrived with the worst possible timing. David's phone lay face up on the marble countertop where he'd carelessly left it, and Jessica's message glowed like a neon sign advertising her husband's betrayal. "Elena, you okay in there?" David's voice carried through the door, warm with concern that now felt like performance art. "Fine," she called back, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Just need a minute." She photographed his phone screen with trembling fingers, then quickly deleted the evidence from her own device's recently viewed folder. Years of managing corporate acquisitions had taught her to document everything before emotions could cloud judgment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career dissecting companies for hostile takeovers, and now she was about to apply those same skills to her own marriage. Another text appeared. "Can't wait for our weekend in Napa. Room 412 at the Aubaird's, just like you promised. Love you. Weekend in Napa." Elena's blood turned to ice water. David had told her he was attending a mandatory sales conference in Sacramento this weekend. She'd even offered to come along, but he'd insisted it would be boring compliance meetings, and she should enjoy some time to herself. The pregnancy test clattered to the floor as Elena's hands began shaking. She picked it up, staring at those 2 lines that should have been the happiest moment of her life. Instead, they felt like a timer on a bomb she didn't know was already planted and ticking. "Elena," David's voice again, closer now. "I'm making coffee. Want some?" Coffee. She almost laughed at the mundane normalcy of it. Her husband was asking about coffee while planning a romantic weekend with his mistress, completely unaware that his wife was carrying his child and discovering his lies simultaneously. "No caffeine for me," she said, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. No caffeine because she was pregnant. No wine to numb this betrayal. No escape into the blessed fog of alcohol to make this nightmare feel less sharp. She heard David's footsteps moving away, probably back to the kitchen where he'd sit at their breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone like a normal Friday morning. Like he wasn't systematically destroying everything they'd built together. Elena caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink. 32 years old, auburn hair that David said he loved, brown eyes that had always trusted too easily. She looked exactly the same as she had 10 minutes ago, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who'd woken up this morning worried about quarterly projections and client meetings. This woman was dangerous. She slipped David's phone back into her pocket. He never noticed when she borrowed it anyway, and began calculating. The Aubaird's du Soleil in Napa. Room 412. This weekend. Jessica, whoever she was, had just handed Elena a roadmap to her husband's betrayal. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed she was dealing with just another trusting wife who would crumble when faced with infidelity. Elena Morrison had spent 8 years climbing the corporate ladder at Hartwell and Associates, one of the most ruthless mergers and acquisitions firms on the West Coast. She'd orchestrated the downfall of companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She'd dissected CEOs' lies, exposed hidden debts, and turned their own weapons against them until they begged to sell at whatever price she offered. David and Jessica had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The bathroom door handle turned, and David peeked in. "Hey, you sure you're okay? You've been in here for..." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes focusing on something behind her. Elena turned to see the pregnancy test lying on the counter where she'd set it down. For a moment, neither of them moved. David's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, then something that looked almost like panic before settling into what Elena now recognized as his practiced mask of appropriate emotion. "Elena," he whispered, stepping into the bathroom. "Is that..." "Positive," she said quietly. watching his face with the analytical precision she usually reserved for hostile negotiations. He should have been ecstatic. They'd been trying for 3 years. This should have been champagne and celebration, and calling their parents with joy. Instead, David looked like a man whose carefully constructed world had just developed catastrophic cracks. He started, then stopped. Wow, that's incredible news. But Elena heard what he didn't say. She heard the slight delay, the careful word choice, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. She heard a man calculating how a pregnancy would complicate his weekend plans with Jessica. Yes, Elena said, moving closer to him. Incredible timing too. Right before your big conference in Sacramento this weekend. Something flickered across David's face, so quick she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. Guilt. Fear. The look of a man who'd forgotten which lies he'd told to which woman. Right, he said slowly. The conference. Elena smiled, the expression feeling foreign on her face. I'm so glad you'll be back Sunday night. We'll have so much to celebrate. David nodded, pulling her into a hug that felt like an embrace with a stranger. Over his shoulder, Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had the same face, but her eyes held something new. David Morrison thought he was spending the weekend with his mistress in Napa Valley. He had no idea his wife would be there too. Welcome to a story about what happens when betrayal meets its match. You're about to discover that some wives don't just survive infidelity. They turn it into a masterclass in justice. Elena Morrison is about to teach her husband why picking the wrong woman to betray can be the most expensive mistake a man ever makes. Elena waited until David left for his early client meeting before she made her first call. She sat in their home office, surrounded by the diplomas and awards that told the story of her rise through corporate America. Stanford MBA, Forbes 30 Under 30, the Crystal Trophy from her acquisition of Morrison Tech 3 years ago. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on her now. She'd taken David's last name the same year she'd demolished a company that shared it. Marcus? It's Elena Morrison. I need a favor. Marcus Chen had been her private investigator for 6 years, helping her uncover hidden assets and fraudulent documents in corporate takeovers. He was discreet, thorough, and had never asked questions about why she occasionally needed background checks on people who weren't business targets. Elena, good to hear from you. What's the case? Personal this time. Elena's voice stayed level, professional. David Morrison. My husband. I need everything: financials, communications, travel records, the works. Starting immediately. The silence on the other end stretched just long enough for Marcus to process what she was really asking. Elena, are you sure? These kinds of investigations, they change things. Sometimes permanently. Things are already changed, Marcus. I just need to know how much. Give me 48 hours. Elena hung up and opened David's laptop. His password was still Elena Love 2018, the year they'd gotten married. The sweet sentiment now felt like a knife between her ribs. She navigated to his browser history, then his cloud storage, methodically documenting everything with the same precision she used to audit companies. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. Travel confirmations going back 8 months. Hotel reservations in cities where David claimed to have client meetings. Credit card statements showing restaurant charges for 2 when he was supposedly dining alone. A secret email account under the name D. Matthews that contained a correspondence history that made Elena's stomach turn. Jessica wasn't just a fling. This was a relationship, complete with pet names, inside jokes, and plans that stretched months into the future. Plans that included David leaving Elena. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Reminder: pregnancy appointment with Dr. Chen at 2 p.m. Should I reschedule? Elena stared at the message. She'd scheduled that appointment weeks ago, back when pregnancy was still hope instead of complication. Back when David was her husband instead of her opponent. Keep it, she texted back. And clear my schedule for Monday morning. Personal matter. She scrolled back through David's secret emails, noting dates and details. Jessica worked in marketing at Meridian Financial, one of David's biggest clients. They'd met at a conference in Phoenix last spring. Elena remembered that trip. David had come home with a sunburn and stories about boring seminars. He'd been different afterward, more attentive for a few weeks, then gradually more distant. Classic affair behavior. Elena had seen it in dozens of CEOs she'd investigated. The guilt-driven overcompensation followed by emotional withdrawal as the cheater invested more energy in their secret relationship. Her landline rang, number she recognized. "Elena, darling, how are you?" The voice belonged to Margaret Hartwell, founding partner of Elena's firm and the closest thing she had to a mentor. "Margaret, I'm fine. What's up?" "I'm calling because I heard an interesting rumor yesterday. Something about David Morrison and a woman from Meridian Financial. A mutual friend saw them at dinner in San Francisco last week. Very intimate." Elena's blood went cold. Margaret knew, which meant other people knew. David's affair wasn't just betraying their marriage. It was humiliating her professionally. "I see," Elena said carefully. "Elena, dear, you know I adore you. You're the daughter I never had. But in this business, perception matters. If there are problems at home..." "There are no problems, Margaret." "Good. Because the Patterson Industries acquisition is coming up, and I was planning to put you in charge. It would make you the youngest senior partner in the firm's history. But I need to know you're focused." Elena felt something click into place. Patterson Industries was a $2.8 billion acquisition, the kind of deal that would cement her legacy. Margaret was offering her everything she'd worked for, but only if her personal life didn't become a distraction. "I'm completely focused," Elena said. "More focused than I've ever been." After Margaret hung up, Elena sat in the quiet of her office, processing the layers of betrayal. David wasn't just cheating, he was jeopardizing her career, her reputation, everything she'd built. Her phone chimed with another message from Jessica to David. "Can't wait to finally meet your family this weekend. I know you said your sister Sarah would love me." Elena read the message 3 times before the full impact hit her. David was taking Jessica to meet his family. His sister Sarah lived in San Francisco, not Napa, which meant the Aubert's reservation might not be the extent of his weekend plans. She pulled up David's calendar and cross-referenced it with his credit card statements. There it was, dinner reservations at Sarah's favorite restaurant in the city for Saturday night. Table for 3. David wasn't just having an affair. He was integrating Jessica into his life, introducing her to his family as if Elena didn't exist. As if their marriage was already over, and he was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. Elena's hands began to shake as the full scope of David's betrayal became clear. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis. This was a calculated plan to replace her. She thought about the pregnancy test upstairs, about the child growing inside her who would never know a father who kept his promises. She thought about Margaret's warning, about the whispers that were probably already circulating through her professional circles. David had made one crucial error in his calculations. He'd assumed Elena would react like a victim, with tears, with confrontation, with the kind of emotional breakdown that would give him the moral high ground to justify leaving her. He'd forgotten who he'd married. Elena Morrison didn't break down when faced with hostile takeovers. She broke down her opponents instead. She opened a new document on her computer and began typing. Project Recovery, Personal Asset Protection and Redistribution Plan. For the next 2 hours, Elena worked with the methodical precision that had made her legendary in corporate circles. She documented everything, cross-referenced timelines, and began building the kind of comprehensive case file she usually reserved for companies she was about to destroy. By the time David came home that evening, Elena had transformed from betrayed wife into something far more dangerous, a woman with a plan. "How was your day?" David asked, kissing her cheek with the same casual affection he'd shown for years. "Productive," Elena replied, watching him carefully. "I've been thinking about our future." Something in her tone made David pause. "Oh, good thoughts, I hope." "The best," Elena said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I think this weekend apart will be exactly what we both need." David nodded, missing the double meaning entirely. "Yeah, these conferences are always so draining. But I'll be back Sunday night." "I know exactly where you'll be," Elena said quietly. David looked at her sharply, but Elena was already turning away, heading upstairs to pack for her own weekend trip. She had a marriage to save, and a husband to destroy. Friday afternoon found Elena sitting in Dr. Chen's waiting room, a folder thick with printed emails and financial records balanced on her lap. The pregnancy test results were official now, 8 weeks along, healthy, due in early spring. She should have been calling David with the news, planning nurseries, choosing names. Instead, she was planning his destruction. "Elena Morrison?" The nurse's voice cut through her strategizing. 30 minutes later, Elena emerged with a clean bill of health and a prescription for prenatal vitamins. She also had something else, absolute clarity about what she was going to do. She drove directly to Jessica Hartley's office building. Meridian Financial occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Elena had done her homework during the drive. Jessica was 28, divorced, no children, originally from Portland. She'd joined Meridian 18 months ago as their senior marketing director, specifically to handle the Morrison Industries account. Elena parked across the street and waited. At 5:47 p.m., Jessica emerged from the elevator, tall, blonde, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was beautiful in an obvious way that made Elena understand exactly why David had been attracted to her. What Elena hadn't expected was the confidence in Jessica's stride, the way she commanded attention without trying. This wasn't some naive young woman being manipulated by an older married man. This was a predator who knew exactly what she was hunting. Elena followed Jessica's Audi to an upscale wine bar in the Marina district. She waited 10 minutes before entering, choosing a corner table with a clear view of Jessica's booth. Jessica wasn't alone. The man sitting across from her was tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed corporate executive. Elena recognized him from business journals, Richard Patterson, CEO of Patterson Industries. The same company Margaret wanted Elena to acquire. Elena ordered a sparkling water and activated the recording app on her phone, angling it toward their table. The wine bar's acoustics were perfect. She could hear every word. "David's completely under control," Jessica was saying, her voice carrying a slight edge of satisfaction. "He thinks he's calling the shots, but he has no idea what's really happening." Richard leaned forward, his voice lower but still audible. "And his wife? Elena Morrison is supposed to be handling our acquisition. If she's distracted by personal problems, trust me, by Monday morning, Elena Morrison won't be in any condition to handle anything. David's going to ask for a divorce this weekend. I've made sure of it." Elena's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. "The timing is perfect," Jessica continued. "With Elena out of the picture and David emotionally dependent on me, Hartwell and Associates will have to reassign the Patterson deal to someone less thorough. Someone who won't look too closely at your hidden debt structures." Richard smiled. "And you're certain David will cooperate? He'll do whatever I ask. He thinks he loves me." Jessica's laugh was sharp, calculating. "Men are so predictable. Tell them their wives don't understand them, make them feel like heroes in bed, and they'll burn down their entire lives just to keep you happy." Elena gripped her water glass so tightly she was surprised it didn't shatter. Patterson Industries wasn't just another client. They were using David to get to her, to sabotage the biggest deal of her career. "What about the pregnancy rumors?" Richard asked casually. Elena's heart stopped. "What pregnancy rumors?" Jessica's voice sharpened. "My source at Hartwell mentioned Elena had a doctor's appointment today. Prenatal visit, according to her assistant's calendar." The silence at Jessica's table stretched long enough for Elena to question whether she was still breathing. Then Jessica spoke, her voice deadly quiet. "If that bitch is pregnant, it changes everything." "How so?" "Because David actually wants kids. It's been his biggest complaint about their marriage, that they've been trying for 3 years with no success. If she's finally pregnant..." Jessica trailed off, clearly recalculating her strategy. "Can you handle it?" Richard pressed. "I can handle David. The question is whether we have enough time before Elena figures out what's happening. She's not stupid, just the opposite. If she starts connecting the dots between David's affair and the Patterson acquisition, then we move faster," Richard said. "You get David to file for divorce before Monday. Create enough chaos in Elena's personal life that she can't focus on business. And if that doesn't work?" Richard's smile was cold. "Then we make sure Elena Morrison is no longer a problem for anyone." Elena felt the world tilt around her. This wasn't just about her marriage anymore. Her career, her safety, possibly even her life were at stake. She slipped out of the wine bar before Jessica and Richard finished their conversation, her mind racing through implications and calculations. Back in her car, she made 3 phone calls. First to Marcus. "I need everything accelerated. And I need to know about any connection between Jessica Hartley and Patterson Industries. Tonight." Second to her lawyer. "James, it's Elena Morrison. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Bring your divorce specialist." Third to a number she'd hoped never to use. "Vincent, it's Elena. I need a favor." Vincent Reyes had been her college boyfriend before David, before she'd become respectable. He worked in corporate security now, the kind of discreet operations that Fortune 500 companies used when problems needed to disappear quietly. Elena Morrison, I haven't heard from you in 6 years. I need surveillance equipment, professional grade, and I need someone who can install it without being detected. This sounds serious. It is. My marriage, my career, maybe my life, it's all connected and it's all falling apart. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Where and when? Auberge du Soleil in Napa. Room 412. Tomorrow afternoon. Consider it done. But Elena? Be careful. Whatever you're planning, make sure you're ready for the consequences. Elena hung up and stared at her reflection in the car window. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized. Harder, more determined, infinitely more dangerous than the trusting wife who'd found that pregnancy test yesterday morning. David thought he was manipulating her. Jessica thought she was using David to destroy Elena's career. Richard Patterson thought he could intimidate Elena into backing down from the acquisition. They were all about to learn the same lesson Elena had taught dozens of corporate executives over the years. When you try to destroy Elena Morrison, you better be absolutely certain you can finish the job. Because if you fail, she'll make sure you never get another chance. Elena started her car and headed home. She had a weekend in Napa to prepare for, surveillance equipment to coordinate, and a husband who had no idea his wife was about to become his worst nightmare. The game was about to begin, and Elena Morrison always played to win. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect California sunshine that belonged in wine country brochures. Elena drove through the rolling hills of Napa Valley in her rental car, a nondescript Honda that wouldn't attract attention in the Auberge's parking lot. She'd left her distinctive BMW at home, along with any pretense of being the trusting wife. Vincent's team had worked through the night. By 6 a.m., room 412 was equipped with audio surveillance so sophisticated it could pick up whispered conversations from the bathroom. Elena wore a nearly invisible earpiece that would let her monitor everything happening in David's room while maintaining her own cover. She'd booked herself into room 418, 6 doors down the hall, under her maiden name. Elena Vasquez hadn't existed in 6 years, but she'd been reborn for this weekend with a credit card, driver's license, and the kind of cold determination that had built Elena Morrison's career. The Auberge du Soleil sprawled across 33 acres of hillside vineyard, all stone terraces and infinity pools designed to make guests feel like they'd stumbled into a Mediterranean fantasy. Elena positioned herself at the main restaurant's bar with a clear view of the lobby, nursing a Virgin Bloody Mary while waiting for her husband and his mistress to arrive. They appeared at 2:17 p.m., David carrying both their bags with the kind of attentive gallantry he used to show Elena. Jessica clung to his arm, laughing at something he'd said, playing the role of adoring girlfriend with Oscar-worthy commitment. Elena activated her phone's recording function and settled back to watch her marriage die in real time. Room 412, David told the desk clerk. Reservation under Morrison. Elena's chest tightened. He was using their shared name to check into a hotel room with another woman. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Her earpiece crackled to life as David and Jessica entered their room. God, this place is incredible. Jessica's voice came through crystal clear. The view is amazing. Nothing compared to the view I have right now, David replied, and Elena heard the rustle of clothing, the soft sounds of kissing. She forced herself to stay clinical, analytical. This was evidence gathering, not emotional torture. She needed documentation of their affair, proof of the corporate conspiracy, ammunition for what came next. But listening to her husband whisper sweet nothings to his mistress while she sat alone in a hotel bar, pregnant with his child, tested every boundary of self-control she possessed. I have news, Jessica said after several minutes of intimate conversation that made Elena's skin crawl. Good news, I hope. I found out why Elena's been acting strange lately. Why she seemed different yesterday morning. Elena's blood went cold. How could Jessica possibly know about her behavior? Unless she's pregnant, David. The silence that followed stretched so long Elena wondered if the surveillance equipment had malfunctioned. Then David spoke, his voice hollow. That's impossible. We've been trying for 3 years. The doctors said. The doctors were wrong. My source confirmed it. She had a prenatal appointment yesterday afternoon. 8 weeks along. Elena heard something crash, probably a glass hitting the floor. 8 weeks, David repeated slowly. That means she got pregnant right around the time you told me you were going to leave her. Convenient timing, don't you think? Jessica, you don't understand. Elena would never. She's not manipulative like that. Wake up, David. Jessica's voice carried a sharp edge now. She found out about us somehow. The pregnancy is her way of trapping you, making it impossible for you to leave without looking like a monster. Elena gripped her phone so tightly the case creaked. Jessica was rewriting reality, turning Elena's pregnancy into a calculated manipulation instead of the miracle it should have been. You don't know Elena, David said, but his voice carried less conviction. I know women like her. Corporate climbers who'll do anything to get what they want. She probably got pregnant on purpose the minute she suspected you were unhappy. Elena watched her reflection in the bar mirror, seeing a woman whose world was being dismantled one lie at a time. Jessica wasn't just stealing her husband. She was poisoning him against Elena, making him believe their entire marriage had been a lie. What do we do? David asked finally. We stick to the plan. You tell her tomorrow that you want a divorce. The pregnancy doesn't change anything except the timeline. We just have to move faster. But if she's pregnant, then she's pregnant and divorced. Women handle that every day, David. Elena's a big girl with a big career. She'll be fine. The casual cruelty in Jessica's voice made Elena's hands shake. This woman was systematically destroying Elena's life and talking about it like a business transaction. I need air, David said. Elena heard the sliding door open. They were stepping onto the room's balcony. She quickly left the bar and moved to the hotel's garden area, where she could see them through the foliage. David stood at the balcony railing, his shoulders slumped. Jessica pressed against his back, her arms around his waist, whispering things Elena couldn't hear from this distance. Her earpiece crackled back to life as they moved inside. I brought something to help you relax, Jessica was saying. Remember that bottle of Dom Perignon we talked about? I thought we could celebrate our future properly. Elena heard the pop of a cork, the clink of glasses. To us, Jessica said. And to Elena Morrison getting exactly what she deserves. To us, David echoed, his voice stronger now, more decisive. Elena felt something break inside her chest. David wasn't a victim of Jessica's manipulation. He was a willing participant. He was toasting Elena's destruction while she carried his child. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Elena, urgent. Jessica Hartley's real name is Jessica Patterson. She's Richard Patterson's daughter. The whole affair was planned from the beginning. Call me. Elena stared at the message until the words blurred. Jessica Patterson, Richard's daughter. Which meant the affair, the pregnancy timing, the corporate conspiracy. All of it had been orchestrated from the moment Jessica had first met David. They hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been running a con that started before Elena had even suspected anything was wrong. Another text arrived. More intel. Jessica's been married twice before. Both husbands were executives at companies her father wanted to acquire. Both divorced after affairs with her. Both companies were acquired below market value after the personal scandals destroyed the executive's credibility. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Jessica wasn't just a mistress. She was a professional homewrecker who specialized in corporate espionage through seduction. Elena was her third target, and like the others, she'd been chosen specifically because destroying her marriage would damage her professional effectiveness. The sophistication of it was breathtaking. Richard Patterson couldn't acquire his company legitimately because Elena would expose his hidden debts and fraudulent practices. So he'd sent his daughter to seduce Elena's husband, destroy her marriage, and create enough personal chaos to remove Elena from the deal entirely. Elena's earpiece delivered another devastating blow. Have you thought about what you'll tell Elena about the baby? Jessica's voice. I was thinking, maybe I don't have to tell her anything. What do you mean? Elena works 16-hour days. She drinks wine with dinner, travels constantly for business. High-stress jobs like hers, pregnancy complications happen all the time. The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. David was suggesting that Elena's miscarriage could be arranged through the natural stresses of her lifestyle. Or maybe not so natural. David, Jessica paused. That's actually not a terrible idea. It would solve so many problems. Elena's vision blurred with rage so pure it felt like drowning in fire. They weren't just planning to divorce her. They were discussing her unborn child's death like a business problem to be solved. She stumbled back toward the hotel, her mind reeling through implications and possibilities. Every assumption she'd made had been wrong. This wasn't a simple affair or even a corporate conspiracy. This was a systematic destruction of her life orchestrated by professionals who had done this before. And they'd made one crucial error in their calculations. They'd assumed Elena Morrison would react like their previous victims, with shock, emotional breakdown, and professional collapse that would clear the path for Richard Patterson's acquisition. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a woman who had spent 8 years learning how to dismantle her opponents with surgical precision. Elena reached her rental car and sat in the driver's seat, breathing deeply while her mind shifted into the same analytical mode she used for hostile takeovers. She'd been thinking too small, too personal. This wasn't about saving her marriage or exposing an affair. This was about destroying an organization that had made the mistake of targeting her family. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. By the time David and Jessica finished their champagne celebration, Elena Morrison would be ready to show them exactly what happened when they picked the wrong woman to betray. The war had begun, and Elena intended to be the only one left standing. Elena's first call was to Vincent. She needed immediate extraction from Napa and a secure location to plan her counterattack. But when his phone went straight to voicemail, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Her second call was to Marcus Chin. It rang once before connecting to a number that wasn't his. Elena Morrison, a voice said. Male, unfamiliar, with the kind of confidence that came from holding all the cards. We've been expecting your call. Elena's blood turned to ice. Who is this? Someone who's been watching you make some very interesting choices this weekend. I have to admit, we underestimated your resourcefulness. The surveillance equipment was particularly impressive. The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, understanding flooding through her with horrifying clarity. They knew about the surveillance. They'd known she was here, known she was listening, known everything. Which meant someone in her inner circle had been feeding them information. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Room 425. Come alone. Your husband's life depends on it. Elena's hands shook as she read the message. They had David, which meant this had never been about corporate espionage or acquisition strategy. This was something much more dangerous. She climbed the stairs to the 4th floor on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Room 425 was at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. Elena pushed it open and stepped into her worst nightmare. Margaret Hartwell sat in the suite's living area, perfectly composed in an elegant cream suit, sipping what looked like champagne. Across from her, Richard Patterson lounged in a leather chair, his expression smugly satisfied. Elena, darling, Margaret said warmly, as if they were meeting for lunch instead of whatever this was. Please sit down. We have so much to discuss. Where's David? Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. Safe, Richard replied. For now. Though I have to say, your husband was surprisingly easy to manipulate. A few tears from Jessica about feeling guilty, a suggestion that you might be suspicious, and he agreed to take a walk in the vineyards. Very romantic. Very isolated. Elena remained standing, calculating distances to the door, windows, anything that might offer escape. What do you want? Margaret set down her champagne flute with deliberate precision. The Patterson Industries acquisition, obviously. But more than that, we want you. I don't understand. Oh, Elena. Margaret's smile held genuine affection, which somehow made it more terrifying. You brilliant, naive girl. Did you really think someone with your talents could operate in our industry without attracting the wrong kind of attention? The room tilted around Elena as pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. How long? She whispered. 6 years, Margaret said simply. Since the day I hired you. Since the day I realized what you could become with the right guidance. Elena felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. The promotions, the cases, the Patterson acquisition. All designed to develop your skills while demonstrating your value to certain interested parties. You've been magnificent, dear. Absolutely magnificent. Do you have any idea how many executives would pay millions to have someone with your analytical abilities working for them instead of against them? You've been selling my skills. I've been managing your career trajectory toward its inevitable conclusion. Every acquisition you've handled, every company you've destroyed, every CEO who's begged you for mercy, they've all been additions, Elena. And you've passed every single one. Richard leaned forward, his expression businesslike. The Patterson acquisition was your final test. We needed to see how you'd react under personal pressure, whether your emotions would compromise your effectiveness. And I have to say, your performance this weekend has been extraordinary. Elena's mind reeled through implications. The affair. Jessica seducing David. That was all. A stress test, Margaret confirmed. We needed to know if you could maintain professional focus while your personal life collapsed. And you've exceeded our expectations. Even now, pregnant and betrayed, you're still calculating, still planning. It's remarkable. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Elena almost laughed. Her mentor, her career, her marriage. All of it had been an elaborate manipulation designed to test her value as a commodity. What happens now? Elena asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Now you have a choice, Richard said. Join us willingly and become the most powerful behind-the-scenes player in corporate America. Work exclusively for our consortium, help us acquire whatever companies we target, and live the kind of life most people only dream about. And if I refuse? Margaret's expression hardened. Then you become a liability that needs to be eliminated. Your husband dies in a tragic accident during his romantic weekend. You, devastated by grief and pregnant, suffer a mental breakdown that ends your career. Very sad. Very believable. Elena felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. And Jessica? What's her role in all this? Jessica is exactly what you discovered, Richard's daughter and a specialist in executive manipulation. But she's also something else. Margaret paused, savoring the moment. She's pregnant too, Elena. With David's child. Has been for 10 weeks. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. 10 weeks. 2 weeks longer than her own pregnancy. Which meant Jessica had gotten pregnant first, had known about Elena's pregnancy when she seduced David further, had been planning this revelation as her ultimate weapon. You see, Richard continued, if you refuse our offer, Jessica will console David through his grief over losing you. They'll raise their child together, and David will never know that his wife died because she was too stubborn to accept a generous business proposition. Elena stared at these people who had orchestrated every aspect of her life for 6 years, who were discussing her murder with the casual tone of a business meeting. The scope of their control was breathtaking. They'd managed her career, chosen her targets, even guided her marriage to a man who could be easily manipulated when needed. There's one thing I don't understand, Elena said slowly. If you've been controlling my life for 6 years, why didn't you just recruit me directly? Why the elaborate charade? Margaret smiled with something that looked almost like maternal pride. Because, darling, we needed to know if you had the stomach for what we really do. Corporate acquisition is just the beginning. Our clients have diverse needs. Hostile takeovers, asset stripping, occasionally making inconvenient people disappear. We needed to know if you could compartmentalize, if you could remain effective even when the stakes were personal. And have I passed your test? With flying colors. The way you've handled discovering David's affair, the surveillance operation, the investigation into our backgrounds. It's been masterful. You've shown exactly the kind of cold calculation our clients value most. Elena nodded slowly, her mind working through possibilities with mechanical precision. And if I agree? What happens to David and Jessica? They serve their purpose, Richard said with a shrug. David becomes your devoted husband again, never knowing any of this happened. Jessica disappears back to Portland with a generous settlement and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Everyone gets what they want. Except Jessica keeps the baby. Details to be negotiated, Margaret said dismissively. The important thing is your answer, Elena. Are you going to join the most exclusive consulting firm in the world, or are you going to die protecting principles that never really mattered to anyone but you? Elena looked out the suite's window at the vineyards where David was presumably walking with Jessica, believing he was planning his future while his fate was being decided by people he'd never met. She thought about the child growing inside her, about the career she'd built without realizing she was building it for someone else, about the choice between survival and integrity. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until midnight, Richard replied. After that, we implement the alternative scenario. Elena walked toward the door, each step feeling like she was walking deeper into quicksand. As she reached for the handle, Margaret's voice stopped her. Elena, for what it's worth, I genuinely care about you. In another world, you would have been the daughter I never had. But in this world, you're the most valuable asset I've ever developed. Don't waste that by choosing martyrdom over pragmatism. Elena left the suite without responding, walking mechanically back to her own room while her mind processed the complete devastation of everything she'd believed about her life. She sat on the bed and stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, someone whose entire existence had been choreographed by people who saw her as nothing more than a particularly sophisticated weapon. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Having an amazing weekend. Can't wait to talk when I get home tomorrow. Love you. Elena read the message and felt something inside her chest crack completely. David had no idea he was a pawn in a game that had been playing out for years. His affair with Jessica, his plans to leave Elena, even his suggestion about her pregnancy. All of it had been guided by people who needed Elena isolated and desperate enough to accept their offer. She was alone, pregnant, and surrounded by enemies who had been planning her destruction longer than she'd been planning her defense. For the first time since finding that pregnancy test, Elena Morrison felt truly afraid. But fear, she was about to discover, could be the most dangerous emotion of all, especially when it belonged to a woman who had nothing left to lose. Elena sat in her rental car in the Auberge's parking lot, staring at her phone as the reality of her situation crystallized into stark, terrifying clarity. Every option led to disaster. Every choice meant sacrificing something precious. If she agreed to join Margaret's consortium, she'd become a criminal who helped destroy innocent companies and probably innocent people. She'd live the rest of her life as a weapon in other people's hands, never knowing if her thoughts were her own or carefully planted suggestions. If she refused, David would die. Jessica would raise his child. Elena herself would be eliminated, and her own child would never draw breath. There was no third option. Margaret and Richard had spent 6 years making sure of that. Her phone rang Vincent's number. Relief flooded through her until she heard his voice. Elena, thank God you answered. Listen to me very carefully. Don't trust anyone. Don't go back to your room. Get out of there now. Vincent, where are you? I've been trying to reach you. They got to Marcus. I found him in his office this morning, made to look like a heart attack, but his files were cleaned out professionally. Whoever you're dealing with, they're not playing games. Elena's hands began shaking. Marcus was dead. Killed because he'd been helping her investigate David's affair. There's more, Vincent continued. I did some digging on Margaret Hartwell. Elena, she's not who you think she is. Her real name is Margaret Kozlov. She worked for the KGB in the 80s, specialized in economic espionage. When the Soviet Union collapsed, she disappeared for 3 years, then resurfaced in California with a new identity and enough capital to start Hartwell and Associates. The phone slipped from Elena's numb fingers. Margaret wasn't just a corrupt businesswoman. She was a former spy who'd spent decades perfecting the art of psychological manipulation and asset recruitment. Elena picked up the phone with shaking hands. Vincent, I need help. They have David, and they're going to kill him if I don't. The line went dead. Elena tried calling back, but Vincent's phone went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times before accepting the horrible truth. They'd found Vincent too. She was completely alone. A knock on her car window made her jump. Jessica stood outside, no longer playing the role of vulnerable mistress. Her expression was cold, professional, almost bored. Elena rolled down the window, her hand hovering near the gear shift in case she needed to run. We need to talk, Jessica said. David's asking questions about where you are. We need to manage this situation before it gets complicated. Where is he? Safe. For now. But my father's patience is wearing thin, and Margaret never liked waiting for answers. Jessica opened the passenger door and slid into the car without invitation. You should know that David really does love you. This whole thing has been harder on him than we anticipated. How considerate of you to mention that while you're carrying his child. Jessica's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. That wasn't supposed to happen. Birth control failure. But it's actually worked out better than we planned. Gives me more leverage over David, and it'll make your disappearance more believable. Grieving widower, tragic accident, devoted girlfriend helping him through his loss. Elena stared at this woman who spoke about murder and manipulation with the casual tone of discussing weekend plans. How many others have there been? How many executives have you destroyed? You'd be number 8. Though you're definitely the most challenging. Most of them cracked within the first few weeks. Started making mistakes, became unreliable. You've been remarkably resilient. What happened to them? Jessica shrugged. Depends on how cooperative they were. The smart ones took the deal, made a lot of money, lived comfortable lives in exchange for doing what they were told. The stubborn ones. She trailed off meaningfully. Died in accidents. Tragically, yes. It's amazing how many ways successful people can die when they're under emotional stress. Heart attacks, car crashes, suicides from guilt and depression. The grieving families always accept our generous life insurance settlements without asking too many questions. Elena felt sick. And their wives? Their children? Collateral damage. Though some of the wives were grateful, honestly. Do you know how many women are secretly relieved when their workaholic husbands die and leave them wealthy widows? More than you'd think. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. Elena realized she was looking at someone completely devoid of empathy, a perfect predator who'd been shaped by years of watching her father destroy lives for profit. Your father must be very proud, Elena said quietly. For the first time, Jessica's mask slipped. My father sees me as a tool, just like he sees everyone else. The difference is, I'm his daughter, so I get to live in a nice house and wear expensive clothes while I do his dirty work. It's not a bad life, as long as you don't think too hard about the details. Elena caught something in Jessica's voice, a hint of the person she might have been if she'd grown up in a different family, under different circumstances. But the moment passed quickly. Anyway, Jessica continued, her professional demeanor returning. Margaret wants an answer by 11 p.m. instead of midnight. David's becoming suspicious about your absence, and we need to implement whichever scenario you choose while we can still control the variables. What if I run? Leave Napa, disappear, start over somewhere else? Jessica smiled, and it was genuinely sympathetic. Elena, they've been tracking your movements for 6 years. Your credit cards, your phone, your car's GPS, even your laptop's location services. Everything routes through systems they control. You couldn't disappear if you tried. And even if you could, they'd just kill David anyway and come after you later. Elena felt the walls closing in around her with suffocating finality. There really was no escape. Margaret's organization had been planning this moment for 6 years, building the perfect trap with infinite patience and resources. I want to see David, Elena said finally. That's not possible. Then I want proof he's alive. Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Elena a video timestamp from 20 minutes ago. David sat on a bench overlooking the vineyards, apparently reading something on his phone. He looked peaceful, unaware that his life hung in the balance of his wife's decision. He thinks you went back to San Francisco for a work emergency, Jessica explained. Last-minute crisis with a client. He's actually proud of how dedicated you are to your career. It's sweet, really. Elena watched her husband on the small screen, noting the way he smiled at whatever he was reading. Probably a text from Jessica, sent before she'd come to deliver Elena's ultimatum. What happens to our baby if I refuse? Elena asked quietly. Your baby dies with you. My baby grows up never knowing David had another child. Clean, simple, no complications. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. If she agreed to join Margaret's consortium, she'd become complicit in the destruction of innocent lives. If she refused, her child would never have a chance at life, and David would never know the truth about anything. There is one other option, Jessica said, as if reading Elena's thoughts. What? You could kill yourself. Tonight. Make it look like you discovered David's affair and couldn't handle the betrayal. Leave a note apologizing for not being a good enough wife, expressing hope that he'll find happiness with someone who deserves him. That way David lives, your baby dies cleanly instead of violently, and I can comfort David through his grief without him ever knowing the truth about any of this. Elena opened her eyes and stared at Jessica, seeing the kind of evil that wore a beautiful face and spoke in reasonable tones. You've thought about this before. It's what 2 of the other wives chose. Less messy for everyone involved. Their husbands never learned about the conspiracy, never knew their wives died because of corporate politics. They just mourned their beloved wives and moved on with their lives. Elena felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, but something deeper. Her faith in human nature, maybe. Her belief that there were lines people wouldn't cross. I need to think, Elena said. You have until 11 p.m. After that, Margaret implements the default scenario, which doesn't end well for anyone. Jessica opened the car door, then paused. For what it's worth, Elena, I hope you choose to join us. You're too intelligent to waste on martyrdom, and David really would be happier not knowing the truth about any of this. Jessica walked away, leaving Elena alone with her impossible choices and the growing darkness of the Napa Valley evening. Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos of David, their wedding day, vacations, quiet moments at home when they'd been happy and in love and planning a future together. The man in those photos had no idea his wife was being forced to choose between becoming a monster or dying to protect him from the truth. She thought about the child growing inside her, about the future they'd never have if she chose wrong. She thought about Marcus, dead because he'd tried to help her. She thought about Vincent, probably dead too by now. Everyone who'd tried to help her had been eliminated. She was alone, pregnant, and facing an organization that had been planning her destruction longer than she'd been building her defenses. Elena Morrison, who had spent 8 years learning how to win impossible battles, finally faced a fight she couldn't win. She sat in her rental car as the sun set over the vineyards, watching the sky turn the color of blood, and felt despair settle into her bones like winter. For the first time in her adult life, Elena Morrison had no plan, no strategy, no way forward that didn't end in tragedy. She had 3 hours to choose how her story would end. And every option led to darkness. Elena sat in the gathering darkness of the Aubaird's parking lot, watching the lights come on in the resort windows like scattered stars. In one of those rooms, David waited for her to return from a work emergency that didn't exist. In another, Margaret and Richard planned her death with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this before. She had 2 hours and 17 minutes to choose her ending. Elena pulled out her laptop and opened a new document, her fingers moving automatically across the keyboard as her mind worked through the impossible mathematics of her situation. She'd spent 8 years solving problems by finding the hidden variables, the overlooked assets, the pressure points that could shift entire equations. But this equation had no solution. Every variable led to loss. Unless Elena stopped typing and stared at her reflection in the laptop screen. What if she'd been approaching this wrong? What if instead of trying to escape Margaret's trap, she used the trap itself as a weapon? She opened her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she'd hoped never to use. Dr. Sarah Kim, forensic accountant and the one person in California who was better at finding hidden money than Elena herself. More importantly, Sarah owed Elena a favor that went back 10 years. Elena Morrison. Sarah's voice carried surprise and wariness. This is unexpected. Sarah, I need a favor. A big one. Tonight. What kind of favor? The kind that could get us both killed if we're not careful. But the kind that could also bring down one of the most corrupt organizations on the West Coast. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Are you in trouble? The worst kind. But I think I found a way out. I need you to trace every financial transaction connected to Hartwell and Associates for the past 6 years. Every client payment, every expense account, every hidden transfer. I need to know where the money comes from and where it goes. Elena, that's illegal without a warrant. So is murder, which is what they're planning for my husband and me if I don't give them what they want by 11 p.m. Another pause. What exactly are you asking me to do? Elena looked at her watch. 9:43 p.m. 1 hour and 17 minutes. I'm asking you to help me turn Margaret Hartwell's own weapons against her. And I'm asking you to do it in 77 minutes. That's impossible. Sarah, remember the Yamamoto case? When I testified on your behalf during the SEC investigation. When I could have thrown you under the bus to save my own career. Elena heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. The Yamamoto case had nearly destroyed Sarah's reputation, but Elena's testimony had exonerated her completely. What do you need? Sarah asked quietly. Everything. Client lists, payment schedules, routing numbers, offshore accounts. If Margaret's organization is what I think it is, there's money flowing through systems that aren't supposed to exist. Find it. And then what? Then I make them an offer they can't refuse. Elena hung up and made her second call. James Brennan. Her lawyer's voice carried the exhaustion of someone working late on a Saturday night. James, it's Elena Morrison. I need you to draft a document. Something very specific, very time-sensitive, and very dangerous. Elena, what's going on? I sound like someone whose entire life has been a lie and who has 1 hour to turn that lie into a weapon. Can you help me or not? Tell me what you need. Elena outlined her requirements in precise, legal language while her mind raced through implications and possibilities. James asked clarifying questions with the measured calm of someone who'd spent 20 years helping clients navigate disasters. Elena, he said when she finished, what you're describing could be considered extortion. What they're doing could be considered terrorism. Which would you rather have on your conscience? When do you need this? 47 minutes. That's impossible. Make it possible, James. Lives depend on it. Her third call was the most dangerous. Elena, darling. Margaret's voice carried warm affection that made Elena's skin crawl. I was hoping to hear from you. Have you made your decision? I want to meet, Elena said. All of you, David included. I have a counter-proposal. Counter-proposal? Margaret's tone sharpened. My dear, this isn't a negotiation. Everything's a negotiation, Margaret. You taught me that. Room 425 in 30 minutes. Bring David, bring Richard, bring Jessica. I'll bring something that will change how you think about this entire situation. And what might that be? Proof that you're not as untouchable as you think you are. Elena hung up before Margaret could respond, then opened her laptop and began typing with the focused intensity that had made her legendary in hostile takeovers. For 30 minutes, Elena worked with surgical precision, building something that hadn't existed an hour ago. A weapon made of pure information, designed to exploit the one weakness every criminal organization possessed: their own greed. At 10:47 p.m., Elena walked into room 425 carrying a manila folder and the kind of cold confidence that came from finally understanding the game she'd been playing. Margaret, Richard, Jessica, and David sat around the suite's dining table like a family gathering, except family gatherings didn't usually involve kidnapping and extortion. David looked confused but unharmed. Jessica appeared bored. Richard checked his watch with obvious impatience. Margaret smiled with genuine warmth. Elena, you look marvelous. Motherhood agrees with you, even under these trying circumstances. Thank you, Elena replied, taking the empty chair across from them. Before we begin, I want to make sure David understands what's happening here. Elena, what's going on? David's voice carried the bewildered tone of someone who'd been kept in the dark about his own life. Jessica said there was some kind of business emergency, but then Margaret showed up saying you needed to discuss something urgent about work. David, Elena said gently, these people have been manipulating our marriage for 6 years. Jessica's affair with you was orchestrated by her father to destroy my effectiveness as an acquisitions specialist. Everything that's happened, the seduction, the pregnancy, the emotional manipulation, it was all designed to force me into joining their criminal organization. David's face went white. That's impossible. Jessica would never. Show him, Elena said to Jessica. Jessica looked to her father, who nodded. She pulled out her phone and showed David a message thread with her father that went back months, detailing every aspect of their affair and its strategic purpose. David read in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to horror to something that looked like grief. The baby, he whispered, is real, Jessica said matter-of-factly, though the timing was unplanned. Still, it's proved useful for maintaining emotional leverage. Elena watched her husband process the complete destruction of everything he'd believed about his recent choices. Part of her felt sorry for him. The larger part felt glad he finally understood what they were really dealing with. Now, Elena said, opening her manila folder, let's discuss my counter-proposal. She placed a document on the table that made Richard's eyebrows rise and Margaret's smile falter. What am I looking at? Richard asked. A complete financial analysis of your organization's operations for the past 6 years. Every client, every payment, every offshore account, every transaction that shouldn't exist. Elena's voice carried the clinical precision of a coroner's report. It's fascinating reading. Margaret's mask slipped completely. How did you? The same way I've dismantled every other criminal organization masquerading as a legitimate business. I followed the money. Elena placed additional documents on the table. Turns out, when you're running a conspiracy that involves 8 different shell companies, 14 offshore accounts, and approximately $47 million in illegal payments, you leave quite a paper trail. Richard leaned forward, his expression dangerous. Those records are sealed. Protected. Impossible to access without having friends in the right places? You're correct. Fortunately, I've spent 8 years building relationships with forensic accountants, federal investigators, and corporate attorneys who owe me favors. Elena smiled. The same skills you've been exploiting can be turned in directions you didn't anticipate. Jessica looked between her father and Margaret with growing alarm. What is she saying? She's saying, Margaret replied slowly, that she's managed to gather evidence of our operations. Evidence that's currently sitting in the hands of 3 different federal agencies. Elena continued, with instructions to release everything if I don't check in by midnight tonight. A dead man's switch, if you will. The silence around the table stretched taut with implications. You're bluffing, Richard said finally. Elena placed her phone on the table and activated the speaker. Sarah, are you there? I'm here, Elena. The packages have been delivered as requested. FBI Financial Crimes Division, SEC Enforcement, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit all have copies of everything we discussed. Elena ended the call and looked around the table at four people whose entire world had just shifted beneath their feet. So here's my counter-proposal, she said. You dissolve your organization immediately. You return every stolen asset to its rightful owners. You surrender yourselves to federal authorities with full cooperation and complete disclosure of your operations. And if we refuse? Margaret asked quietly. Then by Monday morning, you'll be the subjects of the largest corporate crime investigation in California history. Every client you've defrauded, every company you've destroyed, every executive you've manipulated, they'll all have federal resources dedicated to seeking justice. David found his voice finally. What about us? Our marriage? Elena looked at her husband, this man she'd loved, who'd been used as a weapon against her by people who saw human relationships as nothing more than tactical advantages. That depends, she said carefully, on whether you can live with the truth about everything that's happened, and whether I can forgive you for believing that our pregnancy was a manipulation instead of a miracle. David's eyes filled with tears. Elena, I never wanted any of this. I thought I was falling in love. I thought you were pulling away from me because of work stress. You thought what they wanted you to think, Elena replied. The question is what you choose to think now. Margaret cleared her throat. This is all very touching, but you seem to have forgotten something crucial, Elena. We have resources you can't imagine. Connections that reach into every level of government. Your evidence may cause us some inconvenience, but it won't destroy us. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Napa Valley darkness. You're probably right, Margaret. Your organization might survive this. You might find ways to discredit the evidence, intimidate witnesses, make the whole thing disappear into bureaucratic limbo. She turned back to face them. But you know what won't survive? Your relationship with each other. Elena placed one final document on the table. Guess what else my forensic accountant found? Evidence that Margaret has been skimming money from the organization for years. $23 million diverted to personal accounts that Richard doesn't know about. Richard's head snapped toward Margaret, his expression shifting from confidence to suspicion. And Richard, Elena continued, your daughter Jessica has been building her own client list, planning to break away and start her own operation, using contacts and methods she learned from you, but keeping the profits for herself. Jessica's face went pale as her father's gaze fixed on her with murderous intensity. The beautiful thing about criminal organizations, Elena observed, is that they're built on greed and mistrust. All you have to do is provide proof that everyone's betraying everyone else, and they destroy each other for you. Margaret and Richard stared at each other across the table, while Jessica looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. David watched the implosion with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a car crash. So here's what's going to happen, Elena said. You're all going to walk away from each other and never contact any of us again. You're going to liquidate this organization, return the stolen money, and disappear into whatever holes you crawled out of. Because if you don't, I won't just release the financial evidence. I'll make sure each of you gets detailed information about how the others have been betraying you. Elena picked up her folder and headed for the door. Elena, Margaret called after her. You realize this means war. We won't just disappear quietly. Elena paused at the threshold and looked back at the woman who'd controlled her life for 6 years. Margaret, you taught me everything I know about warfare. But you forgot to teach me the most important lesson. Which is, never start a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Elena walked out, leaving them to destroy each other while she went to save her marriage, her child, and what remained of her life. Elena found David sitting alone on the resort's terrace at midnight, staring out at the dark vineyards with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire reality had been rewritten in a single evening. She sat beside him without speaking, letting the silence stretch between them like a bridge they both had to choose whether to cross. How long have you known? David asked finally, his voice hollow. About the affair? Since yesterday morning. About the conspiracy? Since this afternoon. About you being manipulated instead of choosing to betray me? Since about an hour ago. David turned to look at her, and Elena saw something broken in his eyes that might never fully heal. I thought I was falling in love with someone who understood me. I thought you were pulling away because your career mattered more than our marriage. I thought. He stopped, shaking his head. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. For all of it. David, they're professionals. They've been doing this for years, destroying marriages and manipulating people who never saw it coming. You weren't weak or stupid. You were targeted by experts. But I made choices. I chose to have dinner with Jessica instead of coming home to you. I chose to tell her things about our marriage that I should have been telling you. I chose to believe her when she said you were cold and career-obsessed. His voice cracked. I chose to sleep with her while you were home alone, hoping we'd finally get pregnant. Elena felt tears threaten for the first time since this nightmare began. We did get pregnant, David. Despite everything they did to us, despite all their manipulation and lies, we created something beautiful together. What happens now? David asked. How do we come back from this? Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the news. Your friends are having a difficult evening. V. Elena's heart jumped. Vincent was alive. She opened her news app and found exactly what she'd been hoping for. Federal raids target alleged corporate conspiracy. The article was brief but devastating. Simultaneous raids on Hartwell and Associates, Patterson Industries, and 3 shell companies had resulted in arrests, seized documents, and frozen assets. They're finished, Elena whispered, showing David the screen. What about Jessica? The baby? Elena scrolled through more articles until she found what she was looking for. Executive's daughter arrested in corporate fraud scheme. Jessica Patterson had been taken into custody along with her father, both charged with conspiracy, fraud, and extortion. David, Elena said carefully, Jessica's pregnancy was real, but everything else about your relationship was a lie. She was assigned to seduce you as part of their operation. The feelings you thought you had for her were manufactured through psychological manipulation techniques. David buried his face in his hands. How do I know what's real anymore? How do I know my feelings for you aren't just programming from someone else's agenda? Elena touched his arm gently. Because you're asking that question. Because you're horrified by what happened instead of making excuses for it. Because when I told you the truth in that room, your first concern was for our baby, not for yourself. They sat in silence while emergency vehicles flashed red and blue in the distance. Federal agents executing warrants throughout Napa County, dismantling an organization that had operated for decades. There's something else, Elena said. Something I discovered tonight that I haven't told you yet. David looked at her with exhausted wariness. More bad news? No, something different. Something about me that I never understood until tonight. Elena pulled out her phone and opened an email she'd received 30 minutes earlier from Sarah Kim. The subject line read, "You need to see this." Sarah found something while she was tracing Margaret's financial records. Something about my background that Margaret never told me. Elena's voice carried a strange mixture of wonder and disbelief. David, my adoption records. They're not what I thought they were. What do you mean? I mean, Margaret didn't find me by accident when she hired me 6 years ago. She'd been watching me since I was 18, tracking my academic performance, my internships, my career trajectory. She knew exactly who I was before I ever walked into her office. Elena showed David the documents on her phone, adoption papers, educational records, psychological profiles dating back to her childhood. Margaret arranged my adoption, David. When I was 3 years old, she placed me with the family that raised me, paid for my education through shell companies, guided my career choices through carefully planted opportunities. Everything I thought was my life, my choices, my achievements. It was all part of a 29-year plan to create the perfect acquisitions specialist. David stared at the documents with growing horror. You mean? I mean, Margaret isn't just my mentor. She's my biological mother. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Elena felt the strange relief that came with finally understanding the source of Margaret's intense interest in her career, her almost maternal pride in Elena's successes, her genuine affection that had always felt slightly too personal for a professional relationship. That's why she was so confident I'd join her organization, Elena continued. She believed that blood would trump ethics when the stakes were high enough. She thought I'd choose survival over principles because that's what she would do. But you didn't. No, Elena said firmly. I didn't. Because being someone's biological child doesn't make you the same person. Because the family that raised me taught me that some things matter more than personal gain. Because the baby growing inside me deserves to inherit a world where people fight for what's right, not just what's profitable. David reached for her hand, and Elena felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in 24 hours. Elena, I know I have no right to ask this after everything that's happened, but David's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you think we can find our way back to each other? Do you think our marriage can survive this? Elena looked at her husband, this man who'd been deceived, manipulated, and used as a weapon against her by people who saw human love as nothing more than a tactical vulnerability. She thought about the long road of rebuilding trust, the counseling sessions, the difficult conversations, the daily choice to forgive and be forgiven. I think, she said slowly, that we have something Margaret's organization never understood. We have the ability to grow, to change, to become better than we were. They're stuck being exactly what they've always been, predators who can only destroy. But we can build something new. Her phone buzzed with another message from Vincent. Elena, need to meet. Now, there's something else. Elena showed David the message. Vincent's alive. He wants to meet. Is it safe? Nothing's been safe since yesterday morning. But I need to know what he found. They drove to a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Napa, the kind of place where federal witnesses met their handlers and people discussed secrets over coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the 1980s. Vincent sat in a corner booth, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Elena, relief flooded his features. Thank God you're alive, he said, standing to embrace her. When I heard about the raids, I wasn't sure if you'd made it out. What happened to Marcus? Elena asked as they sat down. Professional hit, made to look like a heart attack. But Elena, that's not why I needed to see you. Vincent's expression was grave. The federal investigation, it's bigger than you realize. Margaret's organization wasn't just targeting random executives for corporate takeovers. What do you mean? They were targeting specific people with specific genetic profiles. People with exceptional analytical abilities, pattern recognition skills, psychological resilience. Margaret wasn't just running a criminal organization. She was running a recruitment program for something much larger. Elena felt the world shift again. Recruitment for what? We're not sure yet. The FBI is still analyzing the seized documents. But Elena, there are dozens of people like you, executives, analysts, researchers, all adopted as children, all placed with families that would optimize their development, all guided into careers that would test and refine their abilities. David gripped Elena's hand tighter. You're saying there are others? We're saying Margaret's operation was just one node in a much larger network. And Elena's escape, her destruction of the organization, it sent shockwaves through the entire system. People are panicking, making mistakes, exposing connections that have been hidden for decades. Elena stared at Vincent, processing implications that seemed to stretch infinitely outward. How many others? Potentially hundreds. Maybe thousands. Elena, what you did tonight didn't just save your life and David's. You may have triggered the collapse of a conspiracy that's been operating since the 1970s. Elena's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was familiar. Elena Morrison, the voice said. This is Special Agent Sarah Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to talk. About what? About whether you'd be interested in helping us dismantle the rest of the network that created you. Elena looked across the table at David, then at Vincent, seeing in their faces the reflection of her own understanding. This wasn't ending. This was beginning. Margaret had spent 29 years creating Elena to be the perfect weapon for her organization. But she'd made one crucial error in her calculations. She'd created someone who was indeed perfect. Perfectly equipped to destroy everything Margaret had built. Agent Torres, Elena said, I'm very interested. As dawn broke over Napa Valley, Elena Morrison sat in a diner booth, pregnant with her first child, holding her husband's hand, and agreeing to become the federal government's most valuable asset in a war against a conspiracy that had shaped her entire life. Margaret had wanted to turn Elena into a weapon. She'd succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She just hadn't considered who Elena would choose to aim at. 18 months later, Elena Morrison stood in the nursery of their new home, watching her 6-month-old daughter sleep in the soft morning light filtering through curtains that David had hung himself, crooked but made with love. Baby Sophia's tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket, her breathing steady and peaceful in a way that still amazed Elena every time she witnessed it. Coffee's ready. David's voice came softly from the doorway. He'd learned to move quietly around nap times, one of the 1,000 small adaptations they'd both made in rebuilding their life together. Elena turned to accept the mug, decaf, which had become their shared preference during her pregnancy and remained their choice now. Simple changes that reflected deeper transformations. "Agent Torres called," David said, settling into the rocking chair they'd bought together. "The Philadelphia operation is ready. They want to know if you're available next week." Elena sipped her coffee and considered the request. Over the past year, she'd helped the FBI identify and rescue 43 other assets like herself, people who'd been adopted as children and groomed for corporate manipulation without their knowledge. Each operation felt like liberating a piece of her own past. "What do you think?" she asked David. It was a question she'd learned to ask, and he'd learned to answer honestly. "I think those people deserve the same chance at freedom that you gave us," David replied. "And I think you've never been happier than when you're helping someone else escape the kind of life Margaret tried to force on you." Elena smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. Using her analytical skills to expose corruption and help victims had given her a sense of purpose that corporate takeovers never had. She was still dismantling organizations, but now she was freeing people instead of acquiring them. "Besides," David continued, "my mother's been asking when she gets to babysit Sophia again. This would be perfect timing." Their relationship with David's family had healed slowly but completely. Sarah Morrison had cried when she learned how David had been manipulated, then immediately offered to help with whatever Elena needed. The Morrisons had embraced Elena and Sophia with the fierce protectiveness of people who'd nearly lost something precious. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chun. "Sophia's 6-month checkup results. Perfect health, advanced development, beautiful baby. You both should be proud." "Good news?" David asked, noting Elena's smile. "The best. Sophia's developing ahead of schedule, motor skills, cognitive responses, social awareness. Dr. Chen says she's never seen a baby so naturally curious about the world around her. She gets that from her mother," David said, and Elena heard in his voice the same wonder that had colored every conversation about their daughter since the day Sophia was born. The birth had been the moment Elena truly understood that they'd won. After 22 hours of labor, when the doctor had placed Sophia in her arms, Elena had looked into her daughter's eyes and seen something Margaret's conspiracy had never been able to create or control. Pure, innocent potential. Sophia would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, never doubting whether her choices were her own. Elena's laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Agent Torres. "Final update on the Hartwell investigation. Thought you'd want to know." Elena opened the message and found closure she hadn't realized she'd been seeking. Margaret Kozlov, her legal name after her conviction, had been sentenced to 37 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and murder. She would die behind bars, her organization dismantled so thoroughly that its financial records were now used as teaching materials in FBI training programs. Richard Patterson had received 25 years and forfeited his entire business empire. The legitimate parts of Patterson Industries had been sold, with proceeds going to his victims' families. Jessica Patterson had been sentenced to 12 years, but the message included an unexpected detail. She'd given birth to a healthy son 3 months ago. She'd named him David. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions about Jessica's baby. The child was innocent of his mother's crimes, but he was also David's biological son, a living reminder of the manipulation that had nearly destroyed their marriage. "Everything okay?" David asked, noticing Elena's expression. Elena showed him the message. They'd agreed to complete honesty about everything, no matter how difficult. David read in silence, his face cycling through emotions Elena had learned to recognize: guilt, sadness, resolution. "Have you thought about what we'll tell Sophia when she's older?" David asked. "About having a half-brother?" "I've thought about it," Elena admitted. "What do you think we should tell her?" "The truth. That her father made mistakes because he was manipulated by people who wanted to hurt our family. That those people are gone now, but their actions created a little boy who isn't responsible for what his mother did. That Sophia has a half-brother she may never meet, but that doesn't make our family any less complete or real." Elena reached for David's hand, marveling at how they'd learned to navigate even the most painful topics with honesty and grace. Their marriage counselor had warned them that rebuilding trust would be the hardest work either of them ever did. She'd been right, and also right that it would be worth every difficult conversation. "Agent Torres wants to offer you something else," Elena said, scrolling through the rest of the message. "A permanent position as a consultant. You'd help identify corporate environments where this kind of manipulation might be taking place. Protect other families before they go through what we did. David was quiet for several minutes, considering. He'd left Morrison Industries after the scandal, unable to continue working for a company that had been infiltrated by Margaret's network. He'd been freelancing as a sales consultant, work that paid well but didn't satisfy him the way it once had. Would it involve travel? He asked. Some. But Elena, you could set your own schedule, work from home when Sophia's young, take cases that matter to you instead of just taking whatever pays the most. What do you think? Elena looked at her husband. This man who'd been broken down and built back up, who'd learned to question his own motivations and choose love over convenience every single day. I think, she said carefully, that we could help a lot of people. Together. David's eyes widened. Together? Torres offered me a permanent position too, leading a joint task force focused on family-based corporate espionage. We'd be partners, professionally and personally. The idea had been growing in Elena's mind for months. She and David worked well together when they were honest with each other. Their different skill sets complemented perfectly. Her analytical abilities and his emotional intelligence, her strategic planning and his gift for connecting with people. Partners, David repeated, and Elena heard something in his voice she hadn't heard since before Jessica. Excitement about the future. Sophia stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be awake soon. Elena went to pick her up, lifting their daughter into arms that had once held nothing but briefcases and corporate files. Good morning, beautiful girl, Elena whispered, and Sophia responded with the kind of smile that made everything else disappear. David joined them, wrapping his arms around both his girls, and Elena felt the profound contentment that came from choosing love over fear, truth over convenience, family over everything else that might compete for priority. Elena, David said quietly, I have something to tell you. Elena tensed automatically. 18 months of rebuilding trust hadn't completely erased her instinct to expect bad news. Nothing scary, David said quickly, reading her expression. Something good. Something I've been planning for weeks. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Elena's breath caught. David, we're already married. We got married the first time when we barely knew each other. When we were still pretending to be people we thought we should be instead of people we actually were. David opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that was nothing like the elaborate diamond he'd chosen 6 years ago. I want to marry you again, as the people we really are now, in front of our daughter and our families and everyone who helped us survive what we went through. Elena stared at the ring, a band of white gold set with a single sapphire the exact color of Sophia's eyes. Elena Morrison, David continued, will you marry me again? Will you choose me again, knowing everything we know now about how hard it is and how beautiful it can be when two people decide to fight for each other instead of against each other? Elena looked at this man who'd been her husband, her betrayer, her fellow victim, and finally her partner in rebuilding something stronger than what they'd lost. She thought about Margaret's conviction that blood was stronger than choice, that people would always choose survival over sacrifice. Margaret had been wrong about everything. Yes, Elena whispered, then louder. Yes, David Morrison, I will marry you again. I choose you again. I choose us again. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia clapped her tiny hands together as if applauding their decision. The three of them stood in the morning light of their nursery, surrounded by the kind of happiness that could only be built from the ashes of everything they'd thought they wanted. Elena's phone buzzed one final time. A message from Agent Torres with details about their first joint case. A family in Portland whose marriage was being systematically destroyed by people who saw love as a weakness to exploit. Elena showed the message to David, and they both smiled. They had work to do. But first, they had a wedding to plan, a daughter to raise, and a life to build that would be entirely their own choice. 6 years ago, Elena Morrison had been a weapon in other people's hands, pointed at targets she'd never chosen. Today, she was a woman who'd learned that the most powerful weapon in any fight wasn't intelligence or strategy or careful planning. It was the courage to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and hope over cynicism, especially when the whole world seemed designed to make those choices impossible. Margaret had spent 29 years creating Elena to be perfect. She'd succeeded. Elena Morrison was perfectly equipped to choose happiness over victory, family over career, and love over everything else that didn't matter half as much as the people she protected. As Sophia babbled happily in her arms and David called his mother to tell her they were getting married again, Elena looked out the nursery window at the California sunshine and felt the deep satisfaction that came from finally understanding who she was meant to be. Not a weapon, not a victim, not even a survivor. A woman who'd learned that betrayal could be survived, trust could be rebuilt, and love could conquer even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy it. The most dangerous kind of woman there was. One who knew exactly how much she was worth fighting for. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing love over revenge, truth over convenience? About the strength that comes from rebuilding trust instead of walking away? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. And remind you that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, but choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage they leave behind. Elena Morrison's story proves that betrayal might break you temporarily, but choosing to rebuild with love and truth makes you unbreakable forever. Some women don't just survive, they transform their pain into power and their scars into strength.